Why does pyrite form into these little cubes? Now, most of you are going to be vaguely familiar with pyrite, even if it's not by pyrite's name. You might know it as fool's gold, or you might even know it as iron sulfide. So it's the natural amalgamation of iron and sulfur on the periodic table. And it's famous for forming into these cubes. Now, it doesn't exclusively form into these cubes. It can form rhomboids or sort of pyritohedrons. In fact, pyrite or iron sulfide is actually quite diverse. And the manner in which it will form or the shape in which it will take is usually contingent on sort of trace elements that are lurking around inside or environmental criteria that might impact its underlying shape. It's also not the only crystal or mineral that forms into this shape. Galena, which is sort of a lead ore, also forms like this. Diamond, believe it or not, before it cuts, also conforms to the same system, so also naturally forms into cubes. Or the one that you're most going to be familiar with and most dependent on is salt. That also forms into these little cubes. Now, the reason as to why it forms into these cubes, and much the same way as why many minerals that form into cubes do, is because of the system. Now, I've got educational videos that unpack all of the systems in sequence and should break them down in a slightly more comprehensive fashion, but these conform to what is essentially the cubic or isometric system. Cubic is probably the easiest to remember, but those two terms in this context are synonymous. They basically mean cubic. Now, if you don't know what a system is, think of it as sort of being the atomic scaffolding for the crystal. It's the way that the atoms appear in space. And in this context, they form in cubes, which means that when they form, generally as a result of geothermal activity or geothermal heat driving elements on the periodic table together, in this situation iron and sulfur, they'll spread out in every spatial direction in a symmetrical way, which means that in many situations, contingent on certain environmental factors or characteristics or variables, will form into these quite magnificent and very symmetrical cubes, which does kind of devastate the trope God doesn't design in straight lines.